Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Futureview on AI and Data podcast. I'm Obi, your host. Each episode brings expert stories, ideas, and practical steps for citizens, leaders, NGOs, or global partners to know what's happening in the field of AI. Our special guest today is Professor Olayinka David-West. She's Dean and Professor of Information Systems, Lagos Business School. Good afternoon, Ma. Welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Obi, and it's great to be here. Good afternoon, all.
Thank you so much. Please, can you give a bit of background of your work and maybe what you do with AI at the moment?
All right, great. Thank you. It's great to be conversing about such an interesting and dominant topic in our world today. So, what do we do regarding AI? I think for us, it's really about how do we start to guide organizations around the effective and responsible use of AI within the ecosystems and the different sectoral uses. So that when we talk about effective and responsible, it's also about the policy side of AI. How do we ensure that we can build the right policies that are fit for purpose, inclusive, adaptive to the economies, and also the strategy side of it went from the private sector or business side. So to date, we've been working in building and crafting the Nigeria AI strategy, the national AI strategy for Nigeria, which was a collaboration that was user-centered with about 120 Nigerians, both from within and diaspora, big tech, and different stakeholder groups coming together first for a 5-day workshop and then crafting out the strategy. So that co-creation and ideation process was led by us at the Lagos Business School. And then again, another thing that we're big on when we talk about AI is on the research side as well as on the skilling side. On the research side, one thing you find is that when you look at a lot of the global AI indices, one of the factors or indicators they look at is research generated from different countries within a certain scope. So over the last year, we've been supporting the Federal Ministry of Communication, Innovation, and Digital Economy in managing the National AI Research Strategy Project. And that was a project that gave grants to 45 AI projects. And so managing the whole research process to the extent where increasing our publications in AI research is the outcome. On the skilling side as well, one of the things is, yes, while private sector skilling is important, we still believe that some of the use cases that we can use for AI will really be dependent on government policy, government adoption, and government understanding. And when we look at what has been going on in the news and in the news sector, when you're talking about AI is going to kill your jobs, again, that also brings in a lot of apprehension to public sector workers. So we've been doing a lot of skilling around public sector workers and how do we start to think about transformation, not just from a digital transformation perspective, but from a holistic transformation using AI as a tool and as a solution. So that means helping them think about talent, helping them think about governance, helping them think about data and compute and algorithms and models and things like that. So there's a plethora of work that needs to be done in this space, and I think we're in the middle of the storm.
Wow. Thank you so much for that insight. Quite a lot to take in already. That's going to my first question. It said only 37% of Africans were online in 2023 against 67 worldwide. And my question is, I know you mentioned a lot of policy work there. What policy moves could double home internet use in the next 5 years or thereabouts?
You see, home internet use means that we need to provide affordable internet solutions across countries. And again, so when we say home use, we need to think about it from an urban as well as a rural approach. So even in the urban space, when we say home internet use, it also has to be affordable. because
Yeah.
affordability is critical. Now, one of the challenges we've seen in Africa is that we did not really adopt the landline telephony system, whether analog or digital. So we now went directly into global mobile wireless telecommunications systems. And then those wireless telecommunication systems have really been what has grown Africa's tele-density. So we're one of those markets that are mobile first, because we did not have the luxury of having the cable systems delivered to home. So being
Yeah.
a mobile first economy or a mobile first system has also, it has its advantages that people can reach and have access, because if you think about it, Nigeria, where the tele density has surpassed 100%, that's a fantastic
Yeah.
statistic. But then again, it goes back to now, when you now go to what do we do on the mobile phones, right? So mobile phones typically were for telephony. And the telephony function means, okay, you can make a call, send an SMS, and that's fine. Now, when you now go to over the top services, which are now data oriented, so that means you need now, other than just the typical communication and voice communication and text communication, you need a data communication layer. The telecoms have been providing that. So if you think about the Gs, as we call it, right? You started off with 2G, 2.5G,
Mm.
3G, 4G. Now we're on 5th generation telephony
Mm.
technology. But then again, it goes back to the big elephant in the room, which is affordability. So even though this thing is available, how affordable is it? And when we say affordable, think about it from a share of wallet perspective. Because when we say broadband availability, it's not just being able to get the broadband in, but it's about what are people going to use it for. So I'll
Yeah.
give you an example. Education is one of our specific use cases that we say, okay, we might not be able to have everybody in an urban school, but how do we get education to the last mile by using
Mm.
education services and broadband services? So when you think about it, but then again, don't forget that education requires, it can be synchronous, asynchronous. If we're
Mm.
going for synchronous education, then that means we're going to have a live conversation and a live setting. That conversation is going to need more bandwidth or more throughput, right? And that throughput costs more money.
Yeah.
So how do we ensure that while we are taking this in, it can be affordable? Now, wireless technology, again, is more, it's perceived as, it can be perceived as more expensive. So the second is, can we build cabled systems and have cable, at least hub and spoke cable locations
Mm.
using fiber optic cable and different things like that? And that's possible. But then again, it also has a very high investment cost.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the, because if you think about a rural household that has their other bills to pay and they want to be able to say they're part of a digital economy, we need to make
Mm.
it at a price point that is affordable to them. So for example, in Nigeria now, the government is starting a broadband infrastructure project, right? And that is the
Okay.
broadband expansion. A state like Lagos State has already started trying to put the infrastructure in, because those cables have to be physically laid into the roads and things like that. So you need the right of way, you need the cable laying and things. So government is trying to say, how do we now, right now, I think our broadband capacity, cable capacity, fiber, is about 35,000 kilometers across the country. And we have a
Yep.
target now to take that to 90,000 kilometers. And that's a project that's ongoing now. But when you think about that and you think about the size and the cabling that we require, we're also going to need to ensure that the services that people can do will be available and accessible to them. So the broadband, I think, and that's one way that we need to do it. Another way that we've started seeing is now Wi-Fi options and Wi-Fi initiatives and policies. But these things are going to come at different levels of costing that we would continue to manage. But therein, I think the policy area is now our broadband policies. And Nigeria has had a broadband policy that has now been refreshed. But that the whole idea of that is providing certain bandwidth capacity both at urban and rural levels. And with anything with policies also take time and money to implement. So how are we implementing them in a manner that we can ensure that no one is left behind and we're not creating an internal digital divide across
Mm.
our own markets as well. So the policies are really to drive affordability. And once we can drive affordability, then you can have more people use it. And I don't know if you also recall that even when we think about Africa and the number of cables that are, there's some people who track the cabling systems around Africa. One thing that has come out is that yes, we have international cables dropping in Nigeria and Ghana across the coastal lines. Then how do we take those inland as well is the challenge that we need to sort out. And then a lot of the time, what you find is that because we don't have the distribution systems within, a lot of this international capacity is underutilized. So I think it's all
Mm.
about the strategic thinking and focus around getting the international in, but then redistribution internally within the country is important as well. And that also means, again, usage and what do people use it for is important. So if people are still not trading digitally or learning digitally or doing anything digitally, then it's also going to be a bit of a side tool rather than a day tool that you can use for all your business activity. Hence the importance
Yeah.
of a digital economy and that digital economy view.
Wow. Thank you so much. And I mean, I think you covered my second question about smartphones and the use. The double. It's over 1 billion connection by 20. It
Hmm.
will be by 2025. And I was gonna how can short AI courses ride on that wave? Because AI is doubling up every second. We
Yes.
can allow that gap anymore. Yeah.
See, I think, smartphones are available, but then again, not all smartphones that are available and in use are smart because
Mm.
they don't have. So I'll give you an example. Some people buy data packages that only allow them to do certain services, right?
Yeah.
So for example, you might buy a data package for YouTube for a week. So that again is going to limit your utility of your smartphone. So the phone
Yeah.
is only as smart as it being combined with the data access. So, but then again, I think it's really about how do we design tools and systems that support micro learning or bite-sized learning. Because
Mm.
if we know that, oh, somebody has limited access, how do we ensure that that person can also get some kind of knowledge or education? That's one approach. The second approach is, can we zero rate some of
Mm.
these tools and accesses to ensure that we're creating more of the talents that we need and we're embracing AI literacy, knowing that again it's an investment at this time that is going to empower and enable a better quality workforce. But it's
Mm.
really about who is going to incentivize and mobilize that incentive and thinking around it, because we all need to invest in the workforce. And if we look at literacy is really about the workforce or the economic system, right? So
Yeah.
if we did the economics and said, oh, if we invested, let's say, X amount into this system, how do we trace and ensure that there's certain productivity outputs that based on this investment? And that's a good logical way of thinking about investment. So we need to also have some form of hypothesis around why does this investment make sense? What is going to be the output or the net output of it? And then we can go and sell that kind of that kind of motivation and that kind of system. But it's really about the business case, and everything rides on a business case.
Yeah. I'm aware of some owned company like
Hmm.
Zenzeleni in South Africa. It's a
Hmm.
community owned wireless provider that it's like co-op. So I don't know if government is supporting that, if there's any incentive for government to support that, encourage people to form such of cooperative and it becomes cheaper for them because people tend to give in when they have part of what's going on, not just the becoming users.
Yeah, I think that it's really about every community and every cooperative system has to find a value proposition. So
Yeah.
yes, and I think that this is where, how do we sell the need? So if we're pushing a digital economy, for example, and I went to an agrarian society and said, oh, this is going to provide you access to markets, right? And we can demonstrate that use case, then it makes sense, right? Or
True.
this is
True.
going to bring your schooling to your community, so your children don't have to walk 5 kilometers to go to school. Then it makes sense. But again,
True.
it's on a case by case basis, because we have to understand what solutions we're providing to these communities for them to adopt it. And
Yeah.
that's where the hard work comes from, right? So it's not a universal. It's just about looking at each on a case by case basis and saying, okay, what are the needs of a farmer? A farmer wants to sell his produce, right? His produce is ready. What if he can organize logistics? He can organize logistics, he can organize the market, he can get clients, and he can transact and get his payments on that same platform. Is that of value to the farmer? So those are the ways we need to think about it. But again, I think I would go back to, it's broadly around building a larger digital economy. Because when we think
Okay.
about African economies today, we still say they're informal and cash-based. So how do we formalize some of these systems intuitively by why should they do them based on where they are today? And I think people are rational in their thinking, right? If things work and can be sustained, they would adopt those kinds of things.
Wow. You're just talking about me. That this is my passion. I found an organization called AI for Africa think tank,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole thing is this disconnected communities, villages. Because when you mention that AI, many people say, lots is going on in Nigeria, Ghana, but I see that just 1% or 2% of the people, clusters in Lagos, in Abuja, in Accra, and all that. There's huge amount of people that's disconnected, that they don't even know what's going on. I mean, I sent one of the apps, AI apps, to someone, and they said, "Wow, is it mine?" I said, "No." And this ChatGPT that's so popular that they're supposed to know
Mm-hmm.
what it's all about. So it just we're trying to see what we can do to open up, but maybe it's another conversation. Let's.
Let me just put something in there. I think it's, sometimes we might be putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
And we need to go back to first principles and ask ourselves, we need to build any AI solution that is people-centered. What is it doing for the people? So and that's why I'm saying putting the cart before the horse, because if
Yeah.
it's not about the solution, it's about the need it's meeting for the people. So let's go back to have a human-centered approach or a people-centered approach to
True.
AI, and then we can take AI, and you see, people don't need to know what it is. You don't have to call it AI and I'm using AI. All they know is, oh, I'm selling my produce. I know when markets are changing. I know what's going on,
Yeah.
etc. And that's what let's break it down in simple terms that anybody can understand.
Thank you so much. And then based on that, what do you think is the best, maybe hybrid teaching method that will reach these disconnected villages?
I would first of all say best. I don't like words like best because they're very tricky, because best is relative depending on many other factors.
Yes.
And I think to be honest with you, one of the ways we need to think is blending the teaching. And when I say blending the teaching is, so for example, now the Nigerian government has the program which we call the 3MTT program, right? So which is the
Yeah.
3 million tech talent. And what they've been doing is the target is to train up to 3 million Nigerian youth in technology. But being realistic, 3 million is a big number, right? And the implementation approach was like a 1% first as a test case, then we go to 10% and we begin to scale. Even with doing that, what you realize is, and if you go globally, online training drop-off rates are quite high and completion rates are very low. So again, how do you ensure retention? Because again, the promise is not that we're providing training. The promise is that we're creating pathways to economic opportunities and jobs. So if you
Mm,
don't complete, and if you don't, or if you drop off, then we're not going to get to that end goal, which is more of an outcome oriented goal. So what they've done is that they have what they call these learning centers, and they engage learning centers, which could be hubs, IT centers within universities and stuff. And what those learning centers do is that they blend the learning by providing in-person sessions on a weekly basis over the period of a cohort. And what that does is, first of all, there's peer learning and peer exchange within the group,
mm,
and then there's clarification as to what I'm learning. So sometimes you feel that, oh, you're learning alone. Do you really know it? Do you not know it? But then again, when you have to go in person and talk to people, then have you can now have that engagement and that ability to peer and test your learning and talk to a facilitator, ask questions, etc. Another thing that we also should do or not do is we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We still
mm.
have traditional systems like radio. And when you think about radio, radio is still one of the most far-reaching tools that we have. So how do we use delivery systems and delivery tools like radio to broadcast content? Again, that's in an asynchronous manner, but again, it's also the blended approach of it doesn't always have to be sitting in front of a computer. You talked about mobile learning and smartphone-based learning earlier on, but what are the different delivery systems that we can use to ensure that we can take the youthful Nigerians that we're trying to skill into the workforce?
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, it's a very big topic that needs a lot of time to discuss. Let's look at the women. There's a survey that said out of 160 African AI companies, only 13% are led by women. My question: How do you think future AI rules can close this uh, leadership gap so we don't continue saying the same thing all over again throughout the technology
Well, I,
seasons?
I think we've always had inequalities in the tech
Yeah.
space, and AI is just sort of following that same narrative, right? And so it's a narrative that cuts across all digital technologies, because again, there are very few, and there are lots of initiatives and groups that are trying to promote women in STEM, right?
Mm,
Science, technology, engineering, and math. And I think it goes back to certain stereotypes and bias and confirmation biases, right? In the sense where, oh, we had some roles that were deemed female based roles and some roles that are deemed male roles. And as we begin to see, if you notice, hard roles were always sort of looked at as male based roles, and softer roles were always based at female roles, right? So, how do we begin to change perspectives and mindsets? And these are now our own informal systems as well as formal systems. Because, for example, if in a home, your parents say, oh, as a girl, these are the roles you can play, that is going to inform your decision, even if the government has a policy saying A, B, C, D, E. And that's why I'm saying we must pay attention to formal and informal systems, because our
yeah.
informal systems within our homes and our communities also speak volumes. So, in those
Mm,
kinds of situations, how do we start to educate about the opportunities and the benefits of STEM and in AI, in fintech, in any technology space or engineering space, right? And I think once we can begin to do that, that's where the mindset will begin to shift. We get more open-minded parents who are willing to afford their kids an education in science, technology, engineering, and math, and then they can go on to further degrees and then can come into the ecosystem and workforce. So it really is also about, yes, we can have formal policies, but even in universities and schools, how are we promoting and trying to attract women And
Yeah.
it's about being deliberate about it, right? So again, we know that yes, there's certain roles that women have that are again culturally and socially imposed roles. How do we ensure that we're building schedules and systems that favor both men and women? Right? So in a university, for example, you might have a woman who is already a parent or a wife. Do we have creche facilities so she can come to school or come to college and bring her children without, because she's the primary caregiver, right? So it's really about thinking about systems and structures that are good for both women and for men. And there's a school of thought that, when you take time to curate product services for women, they actually work better for everybody. But I
Yeah.
think, again, we're not deliberate enough in terms of those mindsets. But what government can do is start to tell us and educate and impose reporting mandates and reporting requirements around, oh, what's your intake? What's the number of men? What's the number of females? And then
Yeah.
begin to monitor us and saying, okay, to promote women in science and technology, can we have a benchmark of 30% that we report on? Right? And it will take a lot of time because, like I said,
Yeah.
it's also educating at the home level. How do we ensure that, we've talked about on campus childcare and removing barriers? And then again, for women, even after college and university, sometimes you find out that even when women study, the workplaces might not be favorable to women. Like, okay, I worked in technology. Sometimes in the good old days, you would have system outage and you might have to stay in the office till the early hours of the morning and things like that. How does that work for a woman who has young children and things like that? So
Mhm.
again, we need what we call he for she's in the homes, in the workplaces
Yeah.
as well, to support and enable women to ensure that they can also grow and have fulfilling careers. And then finally, within the AI space as well, one of the things that we've seen and we've observed is this issue around biases in models and in building. But then that's
Mm.
also about the supply chain. Because if your inputs or your workforce is predominantly male, then their work is going to be male dominated and biased towards what the males see. So that is why we are saying that we need gender inclusive teams. So
Mm.
again, the way you look at something, the way a woman might just look at it and say, but why did you do it like that? And all of a sudden, something that's so intuitive to a group of men now becomes, oh, but really looking at it from a different perspective. And
Different.
and I think people like McKinsey have done studies around, even at the board level, senior management level. It makes business sense to have diverse teams.
Thank you so much. Diversity is the key. Like you said, people look at things differently, and if you have everyone represented, all aspects of the community or individuals represented in a team, it goes far more better than when you have one, type of people, and it goes far beyond that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. And let's briefly look at ethics. There's always big talks about ethics, how to put guardrails in this AI. So, what do you think must go on a checklist for any AI project, maybe in Africa, that should tick before a launch to make sure we're safe?
I think the first thing I would say is that your checklist will never be exhaustive. And
Yeah.
so it's almost a checklist that's going to be evolving every day. But I think, again, when you look at ethics, I would go to what are the ethical principles that we're following, right? Is there fairness? And this goes back again to what some of the AI systems and companies are doing, are building out their own guiding principles around AI. So first of all, what guiding principles are supporting or underlying this AI system, right? So is it fairness? Is it inclusion? So looking at all those principles would be now, and then the definitions of those principles are also important. And I think
Yeah.
this is going to vary from a country to country perspective. So one of the concerns that we have in the global south is, again, we talked about the digital divide earlier on, is are we
Mm.
creating a new divide when we're bringing AI into the mix, for example. And those are things that we need to be mindful about. Inclusivity, right? Are we ensuring that this system is available and accessible to everybody? So I think the first thing I would advise is, what are your guiding principles around the responsible use of AI? What are the risks of the AI solution, right? And the risk would vary. And how do we start to build principles around risk factors, principles around justice and fairness and inclusivity, and some of the AI principles? And then that would be our benchmark for guarding and safeguarding our AI systems. And then what happens when things go wrong? What is our incident response system? And how do we ensure that, oh, we're up to date and up to speed? And like I said, because these things are a moving bullet, right? Or a moving target. How do we ensure that we're responsive and agile to continue reviewing and aligning and realigning? Finally, before we deploy any AI solutions, how do we also get an ethical check and an ethical test? Because sometimes we do it on paper, but then again, what is done in the design and what is implemented in the build could also have changed. So how do we validate that those same principles are carried through? And then how do we continue to monitor and evaluate that there's no breaches or insecurities caused?
Wow. I wish we can continue going on and on and on and on. And that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for Prof. And to others, thank you for tuning in. If today's dive into AI and emerging technology spark any thoughts, please share with us. We're always eager to hear how these ideas land in boardrooms, classrooms, or living rooms across Africa and beyond. Big thank you once again to our guests and to you, our listeners. Until next time, I'm Obi, your host. Please stay curious, stay collaborative, and let's keep building Africa's tech future one big idea at a time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Obi, and thank you all.